Welcome to the Tank Podcast. In this episode, I speak to guest editor Barbara Epler of New Directions about her book selections for the summer reader. We discuss the history of the press and the dazzling and surprising books on Barbara's list. Hi, Barbara. To start with, tell us about yourself and tell us about New Directions.
Well, New Directions is an old independent literary publisher that was created in 1936 by James Laughlin, and we just had our 85th birthday. And it's unusual in American publishing because it has this long history of both a serious poetry list, which is a combination of translated and American and English, but also a really, for America, a very important and early body of translations. And so translations, in 1936, when he started it, he was under the influence very much of Ezra Pound, who believed there was one world of literature and that Americans and Anglophone readers should know everything. I mean, these were people who had multiple languages. I think JL spoke 4 or 5 languages. Pound kind of spoke 4 or 5 languages. And but they felt like Americans mostly read in English. And so he really set off and was an early publisher here of like Mishima and Nabokov and Borges and Lorca and the French poets like Baudelaire and Rimbaud. And so he kind of hewed this path really early. And so the backlist is amazingly impressive. And he was the first publisher here of like Dylan Thomas. And so he had a really good eye and he had very good ability to find people. And so going along, so he died in 1997. And unusually too, because most places that do a lot of translation in America now that do cutting edge translation, they're really the great people who are getting things I wish we published, like, New Vessel or Archipelago or New York Review of Books. Many of those are nonprofits. So it's just a different model. We're kind of sink or swim. We have to make the money from the books and there's no funding involved. So it's just a different thing, but for the kind of stuff we do. And I'm Barbara and I've been at New Directions since 1984. And so I worked with him for like 13 years and kind of got the ethos of the company, which is you stay small, you publish about 40 books a year, and you try to keep the backlist in good order, and you try to find really interesting authors. And JL had this thing that he learned. He also studied with Gertrude Stein, and Gertrude Stein told him that when you read a really new kind of writing or a work of genius, you hear a bell go off. And that's this crazy subjective way of trying to figure out what is the really exciting new writing. And so we're all, it sounds like we're all nuts, but we do want, we kind of read all of these things and discuss whether, it's the sort of thing that makes sort of the top of your scalp lift a little bit. So we go along and we try to find really exciting new authors. And for America, we were really lucky. We were the first publishers of like W.G. Sebald or Roberto Bolaño, Cesar Ira. I mean, really fantastic authors.
How did you put your list together for our summer reader?
I've been doing these little lists for the summer, and every year I've gotten a little more shameless about bringing in New Directions books. And so this year, they're all New Directions books, except Sheila Heti's book, Pure Color, she's just a writer I admire and has also been kind of very friendly and helpful to New Directions. So these books, which you'll see that I've suggested, they're underneath our UK partners. Many of our translations we share because it's much better for the authors and to have like a publishing house in the city or in the country where the books are being promoted and produced. And, like these UK publishers are all fantastic and they have fantastic relationships to the reviewers and to the booksellers. It's so, like Yoko Tawada's book is with Granta, Jessica Au and the Fernanda Melchor are with Fitzcarraldo. And so we each edit a little differently for the translations so that they sound native to an American ear, especially slang is hard to get right. So these books are in your magazine. You'll see the covers are not New Directions covers because we've shared these with UK publishers, and except for the storybook series, which is my new darling.
What books would you particularly like to highlight?
There's a couple of authors I'm really proud of on this list. Not more so or less so than the other authors, but simply that they've become famous finally, because we've been publishing Yoko Tawada and we've been publishing Fleur Yagi for like, I don't know, at least 25 years in several books. And it's really exciting when, Fleur gets, an interview in the Paris Review and gets a profile in the New Yorker, and her books sell and start winning prizes. And like with Yoko too, we've published like 7 or 8 books, and the Emissary, which we also shared, like scattered all over the earth with Granta, that won the National Book Award when they reinstated the National Book Award in translation. It's so those kind of breakthroughs after 25 years are one of the things that make a job like this really fun, because it's sort of like you've been building up a racing stable and suddenly one of your horses wins the Derby, and it's like, that's very exciting. And then an author new to our list that who really, it's with Fitzcarraldo in the UK, is Fernanda Melchor, and she really burst into fame with Hurricane Season. That was a really successful book, and it's this really scorching voice that gets into the violence of Mexican society and the dangers, especially to women, but really to everyone, and how, I don't know, it's almost like she drinks gasoline like those people who, breathe fire, the poor children in the streets when you drive around Mexico to try to raise a little money. But she has this incredible, incredible ear and incredible voice. Another book that we also share with Fitzcarraldo, and we'd run this little thing with Fitzcarraldo in the UK. It was actually Jacques' idea, and with Giramondo down in Australia, was to read books in English, novels in English from all over the world, where each of us would be reading we were reading North American writers and writers from our hemisphere. And Ivor and Nick were reading at Giramondo authors from New Zealand and Australia, and anyone who is an English language writer who lives, in Singapore or Japan or wherever. And then Jacques was in charge of everything from the UK, but also Europe, any English language writers who were living, or in Africa or wherever in his part of the world. And that was this great thing, because we got 600 entries just in America, and poor Tynan, my colleague, did all the work. But we found this incredible book, and we all 3 publishers really thought she was amazing. And it's a really quiet little book by Jessica Au, and it's called Cold Enough for Snow. And it's this seemingly really simple story about a daughter meeting her mother. They both travel to meet in Tokyo. But it's not simple, and it's not really quiet, and it has all the complications that mother-daughter relationships so often could have. But it's also unclear to me if the mother's actually alive. It's unclear if she's a real person or a specter, and which is always intriguing. But it's just beautifully crafted, and it's really swift and painful. And then there's this incredible book by Evgenia Belarusets, who's a Ukrainian author, called Lucky Breaks, which we shared with Pushkin over there. And my colleagues Jeffrey Yang and Tynan Kogane found this author. And this is a book she wrote about the 1913 or 1914 invasion of the Donbass area by the Russians when they used special forces and little green men. This is an incredible story. They're all about women, and they're very low to the ground, very simple, too, seemingly simple, with the author's photographs. Like a midwife or a florist, and a woman who can't get rid of her umbrella, a palm reader, but living underneath a total constant war, and how quietly. And the weird thing about this is, by the time you get a book like this translated, I think she published it in 2014 in Ukrainian, and by the time we got it translated, we published it in the month that Russia really invaded again. And so the timing was really tragic, but incredibly, we were so worried about her, and she spent the first 40 days, it was biblical. She was in Kiev, and she was doing this thing called the War Diary, which Isolaris was doing, but it was carried here, and it was a live diary in art forum. And so all these people were exposed to her voice. And it was just this tragic echo, because it was these, all these women right now are going through the same stuff. And then she's living there, and she's again presenting this very quotidian, day-to-day, walking down to get cigarettes at the kiosk or going grocery shopping, and the people she runs into. It's it has so much power, because this book, but also the War Diary, which we'll end up publishing in about a year, um, it has so much power because she understates everything. And so this tragedy is so intense. Anyway, I know I'm not supposed to go through all of them. There's a great Persian poet, and there's Fleur with the water statues and other stories. There's a great Dane called Awake. I think it's funny to call him, with Lolly Editions, which is such a cool publisher, which I'm just getting to know. And there's Sheila's book, Pure Color. And then there's my storyline series, which I'm just totally in love with. These little thin fiction books supposed to give you the pleasure you had as a child spending an afternoon in the hammock and reading a whole book, cover to cover, and having that completely satisfying experience. And the writers are amazing. It's like Laszlo Krasznahorkai and Cesar Ira and Yoko Tawado and Felicia Spector, and also Helen DeWitt, who's been missing in action with new publications. And we've got her new book that's called The English Understand Wool. And it's a fabulous little story about a young girl who basically outfoxes the world. But it's a real, I don't want to give anything away. That's an incredible book. And then I wanted to read, I know I'm not supposed to read a lot, but this incredible book by Rosemary Tonks, which is a vintage book over in the UK. And Rosemary Tonks is this legendary figure, and she was a really wild poet, I think. But she wrote these novels in the 60s. And like Michael Hoffman, the poet and great translator, he had told me, "Oh, you have to read Rosemary Tonks." And there's this book called The Halt During the Chase, which I somehow couldn't get my claws into. But then Tynan got obsessed with The Bloater, which is a book almost impossible to buy. It's like if you want a used copy, it's so profoundly out of print that it's like, I don't know, $700. And so finally, then he was talking to an agent friend and found out the Vintage was republishing her. And then we got into a real scramble to get it because she's this amazing book. It's a little bit like novel on yellow paper, but and I think of her. I always think there are these books that are written by writers who are the salt of the earth, and they're really great. I mean, they're but I kind of love the really crazy ones who I think of it more like the salt and pepper of the earth. I mean, just she's so peppery and so mad. And she was this woman who was incredibly chic. Like I read some article that she had a white Italian sports car and wore purple velour suits and wrote these really cutting edge novels and was very well known as a poet and extremely, really, I don't know, like a celebrity almost. And she had her mother died. She had a religious conversion. She decided that her books were evil, and she would supposedly went into bookshops, bought whatever she could, and destroyed them. And she would also check them out of libraries, and then never return them and burn them. She got completely became a religious freak. Um, anyhow, she's in this book. It's mostly all about sex, and she has this really, Min is the main character, and she can't. Her husband's really, really profoundly boring, and he has affairs, and so she's just pissed off at him all the time. And then her best friend, or one of her best friends, Jenny, gets really. She's having an affair with a guitarist, and she's our main character, Min, is so upset, and she says, "Why do the only men I know carry wet umbrellas and say, I'm being starved alive. Quick, the first bookshop for a copy of the Kama Sutra." I say sharply, envy really shooting out. "Have you got your copy of the Kama Sutra?" "Have I?" She gets the message and damps down the green forest fire in her eyes. It only takes her a second to touch the necessary lever and change her mood. Sophisticated young women hate to think they've gone too far in conversation. Anyhow, it's just this fantastic, inner monologue of Min, but then also all these interactions with different characters. And Tonks just seems like so to us like just incredibly English, and an incredibly great writer. So she seems like a major find, and I'm so glad she's come back. I don't know if she'd approve up in heaven, probably looking down dourly upon the situation. Yeah, so those are the books, and I love them all. And I also wanted to say about the book that's not a New Directions book is this kind of crazy book called Pure Color by Sheila Heti, which we do not publish. Um, and it's so odd. It's about a woman who says, she's arrived at middle age and her father's not dead. And all sorts of things are going on. But what's caught the attention of most people is that she ends up deciding, even though she's not dead, she locates her father, whose soul, or he, is tiny but himself, and he's living inside of a leaf. And so she goes to the leaf and hangs out with him. And she says, it takes a certain discipline to be dead. She never had much discipline. Her father in the leaf displays utter discipline. Or maybe he just doesn't want to go back. Father, do you really need me to be in this leaf with you? He says he doesn't. Then why did I come here? Why did I do this? He doesn't answer. He was dead when she did it. He didn't do it to her. And then it goes into these disquisitions about, this might be my time of life, but about she goes, midway through life, the gods strip us. Take anything real that happens in the middle of life, the decline of the body, the death of one's friends, the loss of a job, a strange sense of time. All these things are evidence that one is being stripped. The gods strip us of our parents, our ambitions, our friendships, our beauty, different things from different people. They strip some people more and others less. They strip us of whatever they need to in order to see us more clearly. One's thoughtless marriage at 25 is perhaps forgivable in light of youth, but in the moment of being stripped, we're looked at as though our actions were undertaken by a person who is ageless and complete. Stripped of the glamour and beauty of youth, everything we ever did, it all looks different now. We can see our choices as acts in themselves, not stages on life's way. For if progress in human history is an illusion, so is progress in a human life. In the moment of being stripped, a person becomes clear to themselves. We can see our defects and limitations in a way we never could before. There is a new orientation to life and the self when the eyes of the gods are upon you. The few moments of real presence you have ever felt in your life might mean that a god was inside you or inside someone near you, using them to see you. The few moments of real insight we've ever had about another might indicate that a god was inside us at that moment, using us to see them. When they brighten the characteristics of another person, it's like turning on a light in a darkened room. We might remember that moment of seeing better than any of the other moments in our lives. The person who the gods are watching through you often develops a certain attachment to you. That person may find themselves thinking about you a lot, and you may find yourself thinking about them a lot too. It often happens between two such people that they will feel fated to be in each other's lives. They might like or dislike the other one, or have no clear feelings between them at all, yet there they are, for minutes or hours or weeks or years, mysteriously in each other's orbit, as though something of significance is going on. Then, when the desire suddenly comes over a person to swiftly and dramatically change their life, it's often a desire to evade the eyes of the gods. It may feel like something threatening is happening, something dangerous from which they must escape. A person might blame this feeling on the choices they made or grow certain that they could create a better life than the one they're living now. They might blame the person who the gods have inhabited for all of their discomforts, so they try to flee their literal home. Some people move to a smaller town or seek out someone they loved before and try to be with them again. Bachelors wish to get married, and married people wish to get a divorce, to make one last bid for the excellent life they feel they deserve. But the gods who are watching you from inside another one don't disappear if you flee your life. They will leave the body of your child, your neighbor, or your friend, whoever they've inhabited, to watch you, and find a body in your new life to inhabit, and continue to watch you from there. That's Sheila Heti, and I find it just remarkable. I don't know. It kind of moves the walls in my brain around in a way I appreciate.
The books in your selection are so different when it comes to where they're from and when they were written. What do you think they have in common with each other?
The thing that they have in common, I think, with each other, it's funny because, okay, this is going to be a big word, genius. The thing about genius is it's one of those things that's so ineffable. I mean, it's so elementary. It's like trying to decide what, a molecule is, or, I don't know. They're very, very different. They all have extremely different voices. Like Laszlo's storybook, Spadework for a Palace, is this completely mad meditation. I mean, it's bonkers, mad meditation on a crazed librarian who has the name Herman Melville, though he spells it with lowercase letters, becomes completely obsessed with Melville, and is basically going completely insane and trying to build the palace of true knowledge. So batsoid nut thing because he works at the New York Public Library and he's sick of the library patrons who make the books dirty and don't return them correctly and don't deserve the books to begin with. And it's this, and Malcolm Lowry comes in and Lebbeus Woods, this visionary architect, but his book is all in one sentence, which is completely crazed rant. I mean, it breaks up a little bit to quote Lebbeus Woods' like manifesto on resistance, but it's written as a single sentence. It's so that is like a tour de force of voice. So that's one form. But then, or Helen DeWitt's, The English Understand Wool is a morality tale, but it's all told through the voice of this extremely knowing, extremely crazily, madly sophisticated young heiress who has been actually stolen from her original parents and brought up by these very extremely cultured and extremely exigent, as she says. There's no such word in English for being as tough as her parents were about the qualities you need to be a proper person. And the English Understand Wool. And that's all told from the point of view of this madly sophisticated 17-year-old who manages to outfox a very predatory New York publishing world. Helen can't, I hope she still likes us, but Helen just hates publishers. I mean, really, it's terrible. I feel like I'm always just about to get executed. But, and so what I think, like Yoko Tawada has this incredible voice and this incredible vision. So I think it's a combination of vision, of voice, of a kind of intellectual genius. I mean, it's so ineffable what unites these books, except that each and every one of the writers is outstanding. I mean, I'd be happy to sit here and just read more chunks of all of these books because it really makes sense. And, we're doing Clarice Lispector's children's books, and it's Clarice's voice, and Clarice can be perceived sometimes as a challenging writer, and I don't really think she is. I mean, sometimes like Agua Viva, but Breath of Life, maybe. But the ones like, Hour of the Star or her stories, they have metaphysical things going on, but I find her voice completely compelling. And it's really great to see her, these were stories she wrote for her own boys. And so it's this completely approachable, sweet aspect of what I think is really a genius. And so it's so hard to say, but I would defend any of them. And they're all, as I say, they're so different from each other. Like Melkor is another one that's driven by voice. Harald Votman, who did the book Awake, the Danish writer, he's a classic scholar, and he has written this trilogy about famous, dead people. The first one's Pliny the Elder, which I'd forgotten that Pliny the Elder, he's the one who, when Vesuvius erupted, he ended his life because he actually went toward the volcano. It's so mad. I'd forgotten that. And so in his voice is this mad thing too. I mean, that's really completely mad. That's Lally Editions. And so it's this gross version of the world where he's corpulent, he has nosebleeds all the time, there's horrible smells. And so, but it brings forward a sort of formal joke about how much we can know about the past, but then also rendering it so like almost like a gob of spit. I mean, you just can't get away from it. And so that's another one. Oh, and then there's this incredible book, Chinatown, by the Vietnamese author Thuan. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Tilted Access is doing it over there. And this is this incredibly intense book about and things, you might be walking along not knowing. Like I had never heard of this writer, but she's really famous in Japan. This is like her 13th book, and she's probably my age. She's about, I think she must be 60 or so, and she has never been translated. And this is it. It's really moving. It's all in this woman's head. She is an immigrant who lives in Paris, and she's raising a son, but her husband has left her, and they're both writers. But this whole book happens inside her head when there's a terrorist incident in the metro, and so her boy has fallen asleep on her shoulder, and she just sits there for hours. And it's this really impacted, intense voice and this kind of deep and fractal. Everything keeps, it kind of comes off of itself in this voice, and but kind of keeps going in deeper about what an immigrant experience and living between languages and loss of this great love, and then some fine points about being Chinese or Vietnamese Chinese, and these being sort of very alive in her head, but being very little understood within the French world that she lives in, and just raising this child by herself. And it's a really moving book, but it's an incredibly inward book. And then there's like this completely crackers book, the Floriegi's water statues. I mean, all her books are peculiar, and they're all highly etiolated, kind of prickly, kind of branchy, often set within very closed environments of privilege, like Sweet Days of Discipline was in a girls' school. SS Proleturka was on a cruise ship with her father, and where she, anyway, and this book is an early book, and it's set it's set up almost like a play. It has like dramatis personae, and it's about this Beeklam, this character who lives alone in a villa, but has these kind of byblos, these servants and friends and sort of semi-distant family members who come around his villa. And he's very rich and very isolated, but he kind of makes little feeble efforts to meet people. But he's alone in this, and he's got these statues. It's called the water statues, and the statues are in the basement, and they're kind of running out to sea the water, and so they kind of shimmer and glimmer, but it's inside this like completely broken relationship to the world. And yet there's these characters who, converse with crows, and they're very interested in these snails in the garden who they get intoxicated and observe, and but the people have so little relation to each other. They have a better relationship to the snails or to the marble figures, and so that's a really strange vision. And that of all of her, that's the tweakiest book we've done. And it's an early book that she dedicated to her friend Ingeborg Bachmann. And it's really far out on a branch. A lot of these books are kind of far out on the branch, but that's often where the fruit is. So, or the nuts. Yeah. So I don't think I really put my finger on an answer to your question, because it kind of splays out. That's what the catalog. We just try to find what we think are almost game changing in presenting voices that we think are really amazing and unique. Every once in a while you buy a pig in a poke, but these books are all fantastic. It's sometimes hard because you buy a book often in translation based on a sample and descriptions from enthusiasts for the book, and sometimes the sample, you just read the best chapter, and then so occasionally we bought books that I would not put on the tank list, but mostly those are rare. But it does happen. That's the business of publishing. About 2/3 or 3/4 of the list is in translation. We have a strong poetry list that's American poets, but then there's also lots of poets in translation, like for Farasad, the Iranian the feminist Persian poet. So I'm not so sure there is really an answer to that question. Maybe it's kind of like going to a really good restaurant and you like their food, but all the dishes are quite different. It's hard to describe why people, why one loves all these books so much, but I do.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Barbara. To hear more podcasts from Tank, you can subscribe on all major podcast platforms or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast is by Himera.